Hey, everybody, welcome to the Pittsburgh Sports Memories podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about the very interesting, very dramatic 2017 Pittsburgh Steelers season. My name's Tim Hannon. With me, as always, is...
I'm Steve Wirt.
And so this season, like I said, interesting one, and one that's kind of a missed opportunity because the Steelers really had a good team that year, one of their best teams that year, and they just kind of couldn't get out of their own way. So let's give some background in terms of what led up to this season. In the early 2010s, the Steelers team that had gone to 3 Super Bowls in the 2000s started to slowly age out, and you had key pieces of that team like Troy Polamalu and Aaron Smith, Hines Ward, Heath Miller, James Farrior, Casey Hampton, right? All those guys that were such pillars of those teams just all got old and retired, and that's normal in sports. That happens all the time. You have your window, you either do something with it or you don't, and then you try to rebuild for another run. And I'd say the Steelers did pretty good with their window in the 2000s. They made it to 3 Super Bowls. They won 2 championships, and that was despite the Patriots dynasty being in their conference. So I think that's pretty good success. And one thing that is different for the Steelers as they go into this new decade with guys retiring, the one thing that they still have is their franchise quarterback, Ben Roethlisberger. He's only not even really halfway through his career at that point. And he's still got potentially a lot of years left, but probably not with the way he played, which was very improvisational. Ben scrambled around a lot in the pocket. He always tried to make plays. He was very successful doing that, but it got him hit a lot and it got him hurt a lot. And in 2012, they make the controversial decision to fire offensive coordinator Bruce Arians, who had this offensive scheme that was predicated a lot on long developing receiver routes and Ben holding onto the ball a long time. And they brought in a Pittsburgh native named Todd Haley to transform the offense and really to transform Ben. And Ben doesn't really like it at first. He's pretty vocal about that. But it ultimately ends up being, I think, a pretty good success because Ben really starts to put up big numbers and probably more important for the long-term success of his career, he's staying healthier. I don't know, Steve, what do you think about that decision?
Well, it was funny because I'm when you just said to fire Bruce Arians, it's funny you used that word because they said that he was retiring.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
And then also, I always think of like Todd Haley in the same vein as Michelle Therrien. Like he's a very good coach and he'll turn you around, but there's definitely a shelf life with him. He's only going to be effective for a certain amount of time. He's just like a get in your face kind of guy. And I think that's the guy that Ben needed at that point in his career. And I think Bruce Arians is a great coach, but Bruce Arians is a quarterback killer. He went through what after that when he was head coach Arizona, didn't he go through like 4 quarterbacks, including Drew Stanton in 1 year? So he can get his quarterbacks killed at times. So.
For sure, and I think you're right. That's a good way to sum it up. It's probably what the Steelers needed at the time. It was not going to last forever, and Haley was definitely a guy that was abrasive. The story on him was always that he was the only guy that ever made Kurt Warner say a swear word. So when he was,
but Kurt Warner also said, you know what? Sometimes they needed that, like when they needed chewed out. He was there to, he credited him with a big reason why they made the Super Bowl that year. So.
True. So the offense definitely is kind of reformed and putting up bigger numbers. It also helps that the Steelers surround Ben with some really great talent and mainly 2 guys, running back Le'Veon Bell and wide receiver Antonio Brown. And I think for the first time since the 1970s, you can say that the Steelers actually have a top 5 quarterback, running back, and wide receiver all at the same time. And Bell and Brown, those 2 guys, just immensely talented, but also very high maintenance, as we'll get into more later in the episode. The Steelers also put a lot of effort into rebuilding their crumbling defense. They use a lot of number 1 draft picks on defense. I would say the results aren't quite as stellar as what they'd been able to do rebuilding the offense. That being said, they're able to field a competitive defense, kind of middle of the road defense that does seem to be improving year over year. And one of the big reasons that it's starting to improve around the middle of the decade is in 2014, they draft a linebacker named Ryan Shazier, who is just a very different kind of player. He's a guy that he can blitz, he can cover, he can play the run. He's sort of a do-it-all, and they start to center the whole defense around him, sort of like they had centered the defense around Troy Polamalu in the 2000s. So he becomes very quickly a very key component of that defense. By 2017, all this rebuilding is finally starting to flourish. The Steelers make it back to the playoffs in 2014. They win their first playoff game in 5 years in 2015. And then in 2016, they make it all the way to the AFC Championship game. And so it's really a credit to General Manager Kevin Colbert and head coach Mike Tomlin, because if you think about it, the Steelers had 2 Super Bowl eras in their history, the 1970s and the 2000s. And as we detailed in an earlier episode where we talked about the Steelers of the 1980s, when they tried to rebuild after the 70s teams all got old and aged out, they failed pretty miserably. And granted, they didn't have the benefit of having their franchise quarterback into the next decade, but they also didn't have things like free agency and salary caps that they had to contend with. So I really think Colbert and Tomlin do an excellent job here to take those Super Bowl teams of the 2000s, see them all age out, and by 2016, you're back in the AFC Championship game. So 2017 is really supposed to be the year that they take the next step, because again, 14, they make the first round, 15, they make the second round, 16, they make the championship game. And so 2017, they're progressing kind of one step at a time. They should be in the Super Bowl. And they certainly had the talent that year to do it. They're definitely one of the favorites. And really the only thing standing in their way is their own dysfunction, which by that time had started to become an issue. And so there had been some things that had happened in recent years that, we're starting to teeter on dysfunctional. Le'Veon Bell had been caught driving a car on McKnight Road with LeGarrette Blount, his teammate at the time. They were high on pot when they were pulled over. That was a whole mess. LeGarrette Blount that same year, he walks out on the team in the middle of a game. Antonio Brown, there were a bunch of little incidents with him. Probably the most recent leading up to that season was in the divisional playoffs the year before they had beaten Kansas City. And then AB started live streaming from the locker room, which is supposed to be a private conversation, and he's live streaming it on social media, just always doing ridiculous things like that. And then Martavis Bryant, who was a wide receiver who was very young and very promising, he had been suspended for an entire season for substance abuse. So there was definitely some cracks in the armor. But I think up to that point, I don't know that it was a whole lot more than what other teams deal with. You could certainly debate that, but definitely by the end of this 2017 season, the Steelers are on a whole different level with stuff like that.
Yeah, I the LeGarrette Blount thing that I still like. I have not a lot of evidence of this, but I still think the Patriots tampered. I totally am convinced that the Patriots tampered. They were texting him, "Get yourself kicked off the team. We'll pick you up as soon as you do." So, I don't. It just smacks of because and I've heard stories of that. Like even Jim McMahon just told a story about when he was in Cleveland, Belichick did that. They told him to move his whole family to Cleveland, and then he cuts him, and then he's like, "Just stay in Cleveland for like 5 weeks, we'll put you back on." And he let him stay in Cleveland for 5 weeks and didn't pay him until they finally needed him. Yeah. So and Martavius Bryant, I don't know. I guess he just I don't know. I don't even know what like that guy wasted a lot of talent. It's a shame because he could have been very good. He was still pretty good. He just could have had a longer career, I think, if he just would have kept himself a little more together.
Yeah, I wouldn't put anything past Belichick and the Patriots at this point. I mean, just the way that they figure out to manipulate games, manipulate systems, manipulate people. They're very
It's not
good
even
or bad.
it's downright illegal. It's like against the rules. You're not allowed to do that. You're literally not allowed to do that. That's tampering, but whatever.
Never stopped them before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk about that actual season. It starts, well, let's talk about the offseason first, because the offseason from a personnel perspective goes really well. The Steelers that year, they draft TJ Watt in the first round. He ends up, not necessarily that season, but later on becomes a very good player. Juju Smith-Schuster, who's a very young wide receiver that they take in the second round. And then James Conner, who they draft in the third round from Pitt. And I remember that one specifically because I went to bed before they made that draft pick, and I woke up and I looked at my phone to see who they picked. And I was like, wait, James Conner? I was so excited because James Conner was my favorite player at Pitt. They also that year acquired Joe Hayden, who had been cut by Cleveland in a salary cap move. And he ends up being a very effective cornerback for them. They signed Tyson Alualu to be their nose tackle. He's another guy that ends up being very key. And they pick up tight end Vance McDonald. They also get some guys back that offseason. So we had mentioned Brian had been suspended the entire season before that. He's coming back. And then Cam Hayward had gotten injured about midway through that 2016 season. They did not have him for that run to the AFC Championship game. And he's really the heart and soul of their defense, and he's coming back full strength. So from a personnel perspective, I mean, they are stacked and loaded and ready for a run. But not everything that offseason goes smoothly. On April 13th, Dan Rooney passes away at the age of 84. We've talked a lot about Dan Rooney on previous episodes. I think he's the most important person in the history of the franchise. I realized his father founded the team and his father kept the team alive during some very lean years. So there's probably no Steelers at all if it weren't for his dad. But I would argue that there's no 6 Super Bowls, team that has only had 7 losing seasons in the last 50 years, era kind of success without Dan. So that was a loss. That was a big loss. The other downer about that offseason is Le'Veon Bell is a free agent, and the Steelers decide to use the franchise tag on him. So the franchise tag, the history of that was when free agency came into the NFL in the early 90s. So before the early 90s, there was really no free agency. I mean, if you drafted a guy, you basically could keep him as long as you wanted to. And the players fought for free agency, and they finally got it. But there was a caveat that the owners got into the deal, which was this franchise tag. And the idea was that you could designate one player that was just too important to lose. You just couldn't lose that player. Because I think probably the NFL owners looked at what was happening in baseball, where you had like Barry Bonds and Greg Maddux and these super high tier players just jumping to other teams. And they realized that Dan Marino going to, the Vikings or John Elway going to the Falcons would have just been bad for football and bad for fans, and fans not being able to root for their favorite players anymore. So they included this thing where you could franchise tag a player, and the Steelers, 20 years later, they use that on Le'Veon Bell to keep him from leaving in free agency. And what that means is Bell can't sign anywhere else. The Steelers have the exclusive negotiating rights with him. And if they can't get a deal done, then Bell has to play for 1 year. And I think, Steve, is it like the average of the highest paid running backs, top 5 highest paid running backs?
That's it. Yeah. It's the top. I mean, which I don't think that's bad, unless you think like the overall market is set so low. How much did Todd Gurley just get a couple years back? He got like a ton of money, didn't he?
He did, and that was the season after this. And it's funny that you mentioned Todd Gurley, because when the Steelers first
that's a perfect example of why you shouldn't pay people.
It is, and that's why when the Steelers first franchise tagged him, I thought that the goal was just eke one more year out of him and then let him go. because it is not smart. Typically, it has not worked out well to sign a running back to a big second contract. And you know, in this era, it kind of goes through like these, you know, trends with football, because running backs were devalued a lot. That's why the Steelers got Bell in the second round. Remember, he was the first running back picked in that draft, and it wasn't until the second round. And then when Gurley had that monster season, it kind of flipped back to, oh, running backs are valuable, but then they gave Gurley all that money, and that was not smart. So I really thought the Steelers were just trying to eke out one more year. They really had no interest in signing him, but they actually did. They actually offer him a 5-year, $70 million deal, but Bell turns it down.
That was so stupid. He would have made so much more. I mean, I don't know how much of that was guaranteed, but I guarantee you he would have made more money, probably whatever guaranteed money, than whatever he ended up making.
Well, and as we'll talk about later, he loses 2 years before he is able to sign that big contract. And it kind of stinks for him because the franchise tag did kind of hose him. It was a bad deal for him to play on a franchise tag because running backs are prone to injury. They don't have a long career. And now you're going to play a whole season. Even if it is that high salary, you're guaranteed nothing beyond that season. And so, but that's, I mean, his union agreed to that. So it is what it is. And for the Steelers, I thought it was a bad idea to offer him all that money. I'm glad he turned it down because it wasn't a good deal for us. I didn't think. Bell does turn it down. He thinks that he should be paid more like a receiver because he catches so many passes out of the backfield. So he holds out for the entire preseason. He kind of becomes, you know, big enemy of the Steeler fans. I honestly, Steve, I didn't hold it against him for the principle of holding out. Like I just kind of said, I can see where it was a bad deal for him and why he would want to hold out. But then he kind of like said and did some things that just were, I don't know, it rubbed people the wrong way. I think if he would have came out and articulated, hey, look, I love the fans. It's nothing personal, but this is a bad deal for me. And I think there still would have been people that have been like, do your job. I do my job, you know, and I bring my heart out to work every day. And, you know, I think there still would have been people that would have been mad at him, but I think he could have. I think he could have had more people on his side had he handled it differently.
Yeah, well, it ended up just being, I don't know. I just think he's a knucklehead. I do. Like
he is.
I was gonna say this for the end, but I really did not like this team. I'm sorry. I don't like the player. I mean, outside of like Ben and some of there's only like, I can only think of like one team that I'm a really big fan of that I really didn't like. Like there was the Pitt team that got Dave Wannstedt fired. And this era of teams, they're just such idiots. They're just idiots. They did everything but win. You know, like, and I don't mean like win in the regular season because they did, but like win in the playoffs. And it's just like, I don't know. Oh, we'll get into that later.
No, and you're right. It was a hard team to like, and we'll definitely get into.
They were the Dallas Cowboys without the success. It's so whatever.
That's an apt comparison, actually. Like the '90s Cowboys teams. Yeah.
Only the Cowboys won 3 Super Bowls.
Right. Right. Yeah. Whatever drama they had, they were able to overcome it. And as we'll get into, the Steelers really aren't. So Bell, that's a big distraction during preseason, that whole holdout. He does agree right before the season starts. He does ultimately agree to play under the franchise tag. So he's going to play that season under the franchise tag. The Steelers opened that year with wins over Cleveland and Minnesota. That was the year that Cleveland was looking to improve on their 1-15 record from the previous year, and instead goes 0-16 because, you know, Hugh Jackson. In week 3, the Steelers traveled to Chicago to play the Bears. And that weekend, there was a huge controversy involving the national anthem, as I'm sure a lot of people remember. And the history here was that there was a quarterback for the 49ers, Colin Kaepernick, who the year before, it started kneeling for the national anthem to protest police brutality. And then there were other players who eventually joined in with that. It becomes a very controversial issue, I would say, with people on both sides feeling very strongly about it. And you know, there were people that were in favor of that and thought it was a good cause in bringing awareness to an issue that was important. There were other people that thought it was disrespectful to the flag and to people that had served in the military. I think what a lot of people forget is that by week 3 of the 2017 season, when the Steelers are heading to Chicago, the whole thing is dead. It's really dead. Kaepernick is out of the league at that point, and anyone else who had been kneeling had either, I guess, either feels like their point has been made or just the fad had worn off. Because if you look, I don't know if anybody was tracking how many players were kneeling, but by that point there really wasn't any. And if you try to find news
That's
stories,
with the pierogi races. They won all the pierogi races.
yeah, those stats are hidden somewhere on the internet.
Yeah.
We just haven't found them yet.
Yeah.
But if you try to find like a news story about national anthem and NFL from week 1 and week 2 of the 2017 season, good luck. You're not going to find it because it was dead. It was literally dead. Well, the Friday before the week 3 games, President Donald Trump makes a speech to supporters in Alabama where he goes off on NFL players who kneel for the anthem. He calls them SOBs. He says they should all be fired, that they disrespect the flag, etc. A lot of strong rhetoric directed at the players. And again, I just want to emphasize one more time, no one was actually doing that at the time anymore. But, you know, I'm going to try so hard not to get political here. I'll just say that love him or hate him, Donald Trump had this uncanny ability to rile people up and to push buttons and to kind of bully people who didn't like him into no-win situations. And all of that really benefited him politically and worked really well for him for a long time. And so now some of the NFL players feel like they have to respond. Like he gave them an ultimatum, like you'll stand up and do what I tell you to do, or you'll, you know, defy me. And I don't know that I don't know that they needed to respond, but they definitely feel like they have to respond, especially the African-American players. And so now every team is spending time during that weekend figuring out how they're going to respond. And some players demonstrate that weekend, they kneel, and other players take to Twitter. And I'd say, to his credit, Mike Tomlin keeps the Steelers pretty poised through all this. They meet as a team, they talk about what to do, and Tomlin says, you know, I will support you guys in whatever you decide, but we're going to do it as a team. We're not going to go out there and have some guys stand and some guys kneel or whatever. And so they talk about it. They meet as a team, and they all agree on a kind of a third option, which is that they just won't even come out for the anthem. They'll just wait in the tunnel as one team. And so now nobody can say like that they're standing to you know, in support of President Trump. Nobody's saying that they're kneeling as some anti-American haters, right? They're just going to sort of punt and just not do anything, just not even come out for the anthem. And because they figure, you know, whatever they decide, they're going to take off half their fan base, so they're just not going to come out for the anthem. And I get what they were thinking. I think it wasn't a terrible idea in theory, Steve, but man, it ends up backfiring.
Yes, it does.
So what happens?
I'm sorry. I made up my mind a long time ago, and this is just editorial. I'm not going to comment on politics on this podcast, because who wants to hear the ramblings of a high school graduate? And so whatever. Hey, cool. I do have a cool story about the anthem, though. Here you go. Speaking of, like, my dad is a veteran and all that. And so we're at a Pitt game, and they're playing the national anthem. And I guess Congress passed a law that if you're a veteran, you can keep your hat on and salute the flag. So even if you're like a veteran, like someone that's not active serving. So my dad does that, and like some usher comes up and tells my dad to take off his hat, and he's like, I can put on, and like there's like this big like 5-minute discussion over why my dad can keep his hat on. And so it was like I at that point I just wanted to, you know, jump in the river or something, but hey, whatever.
Yeah,
it's all good in the hood.
Yeah, I mean the whole right. I mean
there's no winning, and like I said, so much has been said about it. I just don't want to. I don't think anybody cares about my opinion on the topic. So
no, and like I said, I think people on both sides felt very passionately, and I think people on both sides.
So are you
made
saying
their
there's
arguments.
good people on both sides of this issue?
Oh man, see what I mean about no-win situations?
Yeah.
So anyway, the Steelers. What happens is CBS is televising the game, and of course CBS is all too eager to show, every possible camera angle of everything during the anthem. Which of course the week before you probably didn't even televise the anthem, but now they're, what are teams going to do? We have to see. We have to see. And so they film the Steelers in the tunnel, but what the camera shot, it's offensive tackle Alejandro Villanueva, who's a former Army Ranger. He's kind of standing in front. They're all in the tunnel, but he's like in the front, and he has his hand on his heart as they're playing the anthem. And so now, because of the way that that's shown on TV, it kind of looks like the team is all protesting by staying inside. But Villanueva, this brave American hero who fought for his country, very courageously defied them all because just how much he loves America. And that's actually not what happens at all. But I think, as we've seen on both sides of the political aisle in recent years, truth is always not as important as narrative. And so the narrative is, Villanueva is an American hero, and the rest of the team are these anti-American bums. And there's actually pictures and stuff that show that Ben and a whole bunch of other guys are standing behind him with their hands on their hearts, but you never saw that. And so again, the whole story is that the Steelers are these. If they just would have came out and knelt, it would have been basically the same reaction. So now the Steelers spend the entire next week doing damage control. Ben and Cam Hayward do like a joint press conference where they try to explain, no, that's not what happened. That wasn't our intent. Villanueva even has to issue a statement where he apologizes, even though he did nothing wrong. So the whole thing's just a mess. I mean, and that's really, again, the drama that just kind of follows this team all season. That whole thing was just.
Did they win that game in Chicago? I don't even remember.
No, they lost in overtime.
That's right. They did. I thought they did. Yeah, that's right. And Chicago really wasn't that good that year, if I remember.
They weren't. But again, with all the distractions and all the mess, and that game had a crazy ending too, going into overtime, and that's another trend that kind of starts. So the Steelers, 2 weeks later, they come back home. They're humiliated in a 30-9 loss against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And in that game, the Jaguars run all over the Steelers defense. They had a running back named Leonard Fournette, who racks up almost 200 yards by himself. And their quarterback, Blake Bortles, he only has to throw 14 passes in that game, which just shows you how dominant the Jaguars were on the ground when your quarterback only has to throw 14 passes. Ben
probably a good thing when your quarterback is Blake Bortles.
Yeah.
Less is more. Less is more with Blake there.
Typically, yes. Although he had a pretty good year that year, as we'll get into later. Ben has an awful game. He throws 5 interceptions. And really, that was a trend all throughout the beginning of that season. The offense had sputtered. Bell especially was rusty from the holdout. And then Ben was very up and down. You could usually count on him at home. Usually during that first half of the season, he'd be bad on the road and good at home. But now at home, he throws 5 interceptions. And after the game, he does a press conference, and they're interviewing him. Oh, Ben, what happened? And he's just like, I don't know. And he says, quote, maybe I don't have it anymore. I'm not playing well enough. And he's probably just being a little mopey and feeling bad for himself after throwing 5 interceptions. But once again, this narrative forms that Ben's washed up, and Ben just doesn't even want to play anymore. Like, he's just mentally checked out. So now here's a whole bunch of drama around the quarterback that's starting to form. Do you remember that, Steve, when he said, maybe I don't have it anymore?
Yeah, people, I think the people that hold grudges against him for how I think when he first got to Pittsburgh, he was a jerk. But then as he, like we all do, you mature and, you get a little better with, behavior and just dealing with people and realizing that, just being a jerk all the time isn't, good for yourself, or it's not very nice to treat, way to treat other people. And I think Ben's had that change, and people just don't want to accept that or forgive him for, his past, kerfuffles or, past, things he's done wrong. So they hold it against him, and this is just, this is a chance to score points, so. And I think I think now though, after last season, with them. Like, I think there's just certain media outlets that are they know if they pick on certain players with certain teams, they'll get a reaction, whereas other teams they won't. Like, if you said, I don't even know who's the quarterback of, like, I don't know, the Minnesota Vikings, Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins stinks. You're not going to get, a super duper reaction. Whereas if you say Ben Roethlisberger stinks, all of the Steeler fans are all upset. So
Yeah, Ben has always been oddly polarizing. I never quite understood why. I mean, you're right. He rubbed people the wrong way early on, but I mean, the second half of his career, I don't know. I never quite understood that. But definitely after this game, that's a whole lot of drama. And the Steelers are now 3-2, and they're headed to Arrowhead Stadium to play the undefeated Chiefs. And they really need a win. And the big play of that game comes in the final minutes. The Steelers are clinging to a 2-point lead. They have third down at midfield. And so if they fail to convert, Kansas City is going to get the ball back and have a chance to drive for the game-winning field goal. And Ben throws a pass down the left sideline. It's tipped by a defender, and then it's snagged out of the air by AB, who runs it in for a touchdown. It's a tremendous play, and Steelers get a huge win against a good team.
that was lucky. That was a lucky win.
it was lucky, and it starts a streak. It kind of kicks off two things. One, it starts a streak of games where the Steelers offense finally starts clicking. Bell does recover from that slow start. He ends up being named a first-team All-Pro that year, and has 1,300 yards rushing. And Antonio Brown also a first-team All-Pro that year. And then rookie wide receiver Juju Smith-Schuster, who we talked about, was drafted that year. He quickly becomes a fan favorite in Pittsburgh. He has the entire city out looking for a stolen bicycle. Remember that?
Yeah. I think there's still a Twitter account called Juju's Bike or something out there.
And he's pretty good on the field too. He has a couple of big plays that year, including a 97-yard touchdown reception in Detroit in Week 8. And then Ben too. I mean, for all the talk of maybe I don't have it anymore, he actually goes out and ends up having a 4,000-yard Pro Bowl season. So the offense really, after that Jacksonville game, starts to click. And so it starts a streak of the offense doing well. It also, to your point, Steve, about kind of like fluky, lucky finishes, it starts the streak of games where the Steelers pull all these wins out of their rear ends in the final minutes. I mean, I could not believe that season how many games where they really had no business winning, but they just won. And a few examples of that besides the Kansas City game. In Week 10, they're getting crushed by a really bad Indianapolis team, but they mount this furious second half comeback and they win on a last second Chris Boswell field goal. In Week 12, they're struggling against a Green Bay team that didn't have Aaron Rodgers, and some guy named Brett Hundley throws for 3 touchdowns against them.
Don't besmirch Brett Hundley. He was a great quarterback at whatever college he went to.
And that game also comes down to Boswell. It's at that time it's a 53-yard field goal that Boswell makes to win the game at the buzzer. And then in Week 14, the Steelers and Ravens play probably, I would say, one of their wildest games ever. It's a 39-38 Steelers victory, and the Steelers have to score twice in the final minutes to take the lead. And then the game famously ends with Baltimore huddling up for a Hail Mary pass, only to hear the referee say this:
"That is the end of the game."
So what did
there you have it.
Yeah. What had happened there was the clock was still ticking and the Ravens didn't realize it. And they're huddling up and it just ticks down to 0 and the referee's like, game over. So that was a crazy game. And Ben had 500 yards passing in that game. I mean, it was, for years you had all the 10-7 Pittsburgh-Baltimore games. And that was not one of those. 39-38 with a bunch of crazy big plays. And so that was really how the Steelers were winning, which was fun, but not necessarily sustainable. So on the field, the games are dramatic. Off the field, things are also dramatic. Besides the stuff we already mentioned, Martavis Bryant publicly tells ESPN that he's not happy with his playing time, and also that he demands to be traded. And the Steelers kind of say, like, who the heck are you to go out there and gripe to ESPN when you were suspended all last year? They actually end up demoting him to the scout team. Antonio Brown, also not happy about the way things are going offensively. He throws a tantrum after a play where he's wide open and Ben doesn't pass him the ball. And he comes on the sideline, starts screaming at everybody and throws a Gatorade cooler. That gets replayed 1,000 times. James Harrison, who's now on his third stint with the Steelers and his fourth season since retiring. He'd actually retired and then come back. He apparently does a lot of stuff. He's also not happy about playing time. And he does a lot of stuff to try to force the Steelers to release him. He falls asleep during meetings. He leaves practice early. And in December, the Steelers ultimately do release him, and he ends up signing with the Patriots. And who knows if Belichick orchestrated that one or not. But that was kind of a. I mean, I think James Harrison will always be remembered in this town for the 100-yard interception return in the Super Bowl and a lot of other good things. I don't know that anybody will hold ill will against him, but that was just an unfortunate way for him to end his Steeler career.
It was not classy, but yeah, that's James Harrison. He kind of has that. Yeah. It's funny, people like will give him the benefit of the doubt, but won't give Ben it. So I don't understand that at all. But.
Yeah, sometime we should do an episode about like who we hold grudges against and who we don't, because it's interesting.
Yeah, I respect James Harrison for what he did, and I think he was one of the Steeler greats, but he did some absolute like jerk stuff too. So
he did.
Good for him, I guess.
Another goofy thing that happens is Lawrence Timmons is hanging out at Steeler practice, and the reason that's odd is because Lawrence Timmons doesn't play for the Steelers anymore. At that point, he had signed with the Dolphins during the offseason, and Lawrence Timmons was, I think, one of the more underrated players on those great Steeler defenses. He was Tomlin's first ever draft pick, and he never got, he was never as flashy or as big of a star as guys like Harrison or Aaron Smith or Troy or whatever, but he was very solid linebacker for a whole decade for the Steelers. He leaves for Miami that offseason, but he comes back to Pittsburgh, and he's sitting in on their practice, and he's telling his former teammates reportedly that he made a mistake and wants to come back. And then a few days later, he goes AWOL from Miami, and the Dolphins actually file a missing persons report because they have no idea where he is, and eventually he's found and promptly suspended by the Dolphins. So even guys that had left the team that year are creating drama.
I remember that too. I remember like I don't know, why would the Dolphins file a missing persons report? It's not your job to babysit me. I don't know. That's just me, but
I don't know. Maybe because they had millions of dollars invested in them. Yeah, who knows? That was really strange.
Why don't you just put a tracking chip in my tooth then? I mean, seriously, jeez.
That's what Belichick would do. That's why the Dolphins could never compete in that division.
Yeah, Tom Brady. Do you think he deactivated that when he went to Tampa? Yeah.
So anyway, it's just one distraction after the other. But the Steelers, they just keep somehow winning games, and often by very close margins, as we detailed earlier. In Week 13, they travel to Cincinnati for a Monday Night Football game against the Bengals, and it quickly devolves into one of the ugliest, most cringeworthy games in NFL history. It's awful. There's multiple late hits, personal fouls, just ugly plays, and for sure the lowest moment of the night is when Ryan Shazier tries to make a tackle and suffers a severe spinal cord injury, and he's unable to move his legs. Doctors aren't sure if he'll ever walk again. And to his credit, Shazier in subsequent years works very hard, makes a very strong recovery, and is able to walk again. But his football career ends on that night on the turf in Cincinnati. It's really a shame.
This isn't the Jerry Porter game, is it?
That was the playoff game.
Yeah,
This is the game that Juju got suspended for hitting.
This is when Juju became a fan favorite even more because he totally destroyed Vontaze Burfict.
Right, and then AB got totally clocked on a late hit in the end zone. I mean, it was a culmination of a lot of years, and we'll do an episode about the Steelers and Bengals at some point. But it was a culmination of a lot of years of just ugly Steeler Bengals garbage. And I remember after that game, I just was like, and to your point about not liking this anymore, I just felt like, what did I just watch? I felt like guilty for watching it. If that makes sense.
Felt like you're in the Roman Coliseum rooting for the Lions or something. Yeah. Not the
Seriously.
Detroit ones either. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a good comparison.
Yeah.
For the game itself, it's just another ho-hum. Steelers are down by 17 points and come back to win on a last-second field goal type of game. So, what else is new? So the offense is pulling out these games at the end. Now the defense is left to try to fend for itself without its centerpiece player, and that all kind of leads to a huge Week 15 game at home against the New England Patriots, the vaunted New England Patriots. The Steelers are 11-2. The Patriots are 10-3, and the winner of that game is going to be the number 1 seed in the AFC playoffs. And it's a great classic back and forth game. The Steelers actually hold a 24-19 lead in the final minutes, which, is not their MO that year to actually be in the lead. And Tom Brady gets the ball back, and he and Rob Gronkowski do what Brady and Gronk always did to the Steelers. They march downfield for a touchdown, and they take a 27-24 lead. The Steelers get the ball back, but there's only 52 seconds left, and they're deep in their own territory, just trying to maybe get into field goal range. And on the first play, Ben hits Smith-Schuster on this little crossing route. And I was at that game. I didn't understand how it happened at the time. I went back and watched it just before we did this episode. I still don't understand how it happened. It's just this little innocent crossing route. And somehow Smith-Schuster just sort of gets by everybody, and he goes down the field 70 yards all the way to the New England 10-yard line.
I think at that point, maybe the spy cameras got turned off or something. So they didn't know what play was coming. Yeah.
There was fog on them or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on the next play, Ben hits Jesse James for the go-ahead touchdown, and Heinz Field erupts. We're actually going to beat the New England Patriots. We're actually going to get the best of Belichick in a big situation. But hold everything, because they're reviewing the play, and sure enough, Jesse James apparently did not catch that ball. And
don't believe what your eyes just saw.
Yeah, I mean, we did a couple of episodes. We did an episode about Pittsburgh versus the refs, so we went into this in more detail there. It was just for years the NFL had decided sometime around the beginning of the decade that a catch wasn't a catch anymore in a game where Calvin Johnson beat the Bears, and they said, no, Calvin Johnson, you actually didn't catch the ball. And everybody said, wait, what? Yes, he did. And they just never did anything with that after. They were okay with this really ambiguous, really ridiculous, like you had to catch the ball, you had to take 3 laps around the field, it was so dumb.
I think I said at one point, hand it to the referee, make sure the referee didn't drop it.
Right. Right. Put it in a glass case. Yeah, it's the most ridiculous call ever, and it's not even the referee's fault. It was the Rolls' fault. And so now the Steelers don't have a touchdown, and then 2 plays later, Ben throws an interception in the end zone, and that's the end of the game. And now the Patriots are going into the playoffs as the number 1 seed instead of the Steelers. And that game, Steve, to me, the only other game I can think of that had that kind of up and down wild emotional swings in the final minutes is that 2005 Colts playoff game. That's the only thing I can compare it to in terms of we're going to win this. Oh no, we're going to lose this. Oh, we're going to win this. Oh my gosh, we just got hosed by the refs. It just was such wild emotional swings, and I just thought it fit perfectly into that season.
Yeah, and I think too, people always say, "Oh, character is overrated." Well, you see that this team obviously had a lack of character, and I think that was a big reason why they couldn't overcome some of the adversity that was put into them. And I will say this about this year: I can't remember. There was a linebacker for the Patriots. Oh, I can't remember his name just off the top of my head, but he got hurt in the first month or 2 of the season. And it took Belichick a full month to figure out his defense after that. Their defense stunk for 4 weeks in a row before he finally could figure out, how to work and I think Shazier's injury happened so late in the season that the Steelers, now I don't know, Keith Butler maybe would have figured it out, maybe he wouldn't have, but I mean, that was a big thing. I just think the Steelers could just never quite, and I think you mentioned just could never really like figure out how to adjust their defense to like, survive without Shazier. Because that you don't realize, like, it's kind of like what you said about Lawrence Timmons. You don't realize those guys are really key. Like a linebacker is really not having one or having a bad one is boy, that'll really kill you.
And especially that linebacker, because they did kind of revolve a lot of the defense around him being right there in the middle.
Yeah.
So the Steelers head into playoffs. Now they're the number 2 seed. They still get a bye, but the problem is there were 3 good teams in the AFC that year. It was New England, Pittsburgh, and Jacksonville. And 2 of the 3 losses that the Steelers had that year were to those other 2 teams. If the Jesse James catch had counted, they would have hosted Tennessee in the divisional playoffs. That was a team they had absolutely destroyed a few weeks earlier. But instead, they get a rematch in the divisional round with Jacksonville, the team that had throttled them back in October. Nobody really expected that to happen again, because the Steelers, have hopefully learned from that game, and they're heading into the playoffs healthy. I think, there's been a lot said about Mike Tomlin's failure in the playoffs since he went to those 2 Super Bowls. But man, so many of the playoff games that they lost, they were just ravaged by injuries. So when they lost in 2014, they didn't have Le'Veon Bell. They were starting, or D'Angelo Williams. They were starting a running back off the street. And then in 2015, they when they lost that game, they didn't have AB. Ben had a bum shoulder, and they didn't have Bell again. And they had who was that 3rd string running back that fumbled in Denver?
Toussaint, Fitzgerald Toussaint.
Yeah, and then even when they lost the championship game,
Hightower was the name of the linebacker from the Patriots.
Yes,
that just came to my mind. Apparently, Fitzgerald Toussaint made me remember Hightower.
Yeah,
I can't remember his first name still though.
And then in 2016, they when they lost to the Patriots, Bell was kind of hurt for that game. So they always had injuries, and now with a bye week, that was the first time they had a bye week since their last Super Bowl appearance. So they got that bye week in the playoffs. They were totally, other than Shazier obviously, but they were as healthy as they had ever been heading into a playoff game. So again, this is a good place to be. You're thinking. Of course, the Steelers have to create some sort of distraction leading up to the game, and Le'Veon Bell's happy to put his name in the ring of causing a controversy. He tweets about meeting the Patriots for, quote, round 2 in the AFC Championship game, and then Mike Mitchell, he guarantees a win against the Patriots, and meanwhile it's like, you guys know you have to play Jacksonville first, right? Like you don't get a bye to the championship game to play New England. And so now, and the Jaguars, use that as bulletin board material. Who wouldn't? And sure enough, the Steelers come out looking completely unprepared. And right off the bat, they surrender 21 points to the Jaguars. So the offense is totally dormant. The defense can't stop anything. And like we said, they never really recovered from losing Shazier. The Steelers mount a comeback in the second half. They pulled it within 7. And it looks like maybe this is going to be yet another game where the Steelers had no business winning, but they've pulled that win out of nowhere, miracle victory. This time their luck runs out. It's kind of like, how many times can you do that, right? How many times can you just live in reckless chaos before you finally lose one of those games? And here they do, and they lose the playoff game 45-42. It's a stunning and crushing end of the season. But I think we should have all seen it coming, because you have this entire season of just toxic dysfunction, both on the field and off the field. And I just think eventually that's going to catch up to you. And it caught up to them in the divisional round. And Steve, to your point about character, right? Some teams can overcome some of that. And whatever it is that other teams had that it took to win championships or win big playoff games, that this team just didn't have that.
Yeah, they were, I think too, like I thought this for a couple of years, because the teams went to like stopping the pass, because everybody went to like those spread offenses, like, and they were just winging the ball around. And Jacksonville came in with, what was the running back's name?
Fournette.
Yeah. Fournette and like this old school like running attack. And like you said, Blake Bortles only had to throw the ball 14 times in that one win. Well, like that's their offense though, and their offense is one of those that like you can either stop it or you can't, you know. And I just had a feeling that like and once you start, especially that first game where like they just ran all, it's like that's not something you just fix in the course of a season normally, unless you just sometimes you see it, but not too often. And I thought it was more of a lack of talent, you know, even after. And I had Shazier for that first game against Jacksonville, and I remember they ran all over them in that first game, and they did the exact same thing in the second game. So, I mean, I knew Jacksonville wasn't coming here and just lay down. So I wasn't totally surprised it went that way. I really wasn't. And the way, like I said, really didn't like this team, and I didn't think. I know people say character's overrated, and yeah, you always want to you have to have the talent, but if you don't have the character too, or like at least the ability to focus on, you know, I'm not saying you have to be like, a bunch of goody two shoes, but at the same time, you can't just be, like you said, creating distractions and not focusing on the game. And, it just, for some reason, it just doesn't, it doesn't work. I got you just too scatterbrained, or I don't know. I don't know. Like this team just was very dislikable. I just never liked this team. I don't know. If they would have won the Super Bowl, I would have been like, yeah. I mean, ick,
Yeah, I don't know that I would have been too upset about them winning the Super Bowl, but I agree with everything else you said, that they were not likable. And I think that, there was a lot of people that weren't Steelers fans it was very satisfying to see them go lay an egg in the playoffs. And I don't fault those people, because I would have been the same way if this would have been, the Philadelphia
if this would have been the
Eagles
Bengals or the
right.
Browns or
Yes, for sure.
Well, I even look at the Browns the year before to the year after, they were doing this kind of silliness the year that, and they didn't make the playoffs. And it's funny, they get a coach in there who kind of like seemed like he was competent and laid down the law, and they make it to the divisional round of the playoffs. It's amazing how a little bit of discipline goes a long way.
Yeah, it's a culture thing, and I think it only takes a few guys too. I mean, I think even if you have the right coach in there, sometimes there's just poison to the culture that they can't be fixed until those people are not part of the culture anymore.
Well, and this made me start doubting Tomlin, and really as a coach. These seasons is just like these guys are, especially after nothing was done about Brown and his antics, and it wasn't just like, oh, he did it once, it was just Juju. Even Juju Smith-Schuster doesn't do, like, he does like stuff, but I think that's more generational. It's just that's the way the younger generation is. They like to do their TikTok stuff, and that's fine. But it seems like when it comes to on the field, like Juju's ready to go, But
Yeah,
I don't know.
Agree. So the aftermath after that season, despite scoring 42 points in their playoff loss, the Steelers tag offensive coordinator Todd Haley as the scapegoat. He's fired. That's not really. I'm being a little facetious there. He's not fired because they only scored 42 points in the playoff game. That's really, I think, to Steve's point earlier about him having a shelf life, I think it's also done to appease Ben, because Ben, he had talked retirement before that season. He had talked retirement in the middle of that season. And when they fired Haley, he's never really talked retirements a lot since then, which I don't think is a coincidence.
Well, it's funny too. Like, didn't Haley have his own off the field issues too? Like, didn't he like get in a fight with somebody about a check at a restaurant or something like that?
That's right. I don't know if that was this season. I totally forgot about that.
Yeah,
I'm sure it was, because it would have fit totally.
But it's like, so like you're like this offensive coordinator of the Steelers. You can't afford like a check somewhere. Come on, man. It's like.
Yeah, I mean, and I really thought Ben. I remember I was at that playoff game, and in the final minutes, I was with my phone. I was filming just plays on offense, because I thought that's the last time I'm ever going to see Ben Roethlisberger play for the Steelers or play at all. I really thought he was going to be done after that, and then he ended up playing at least 4 more seasons. We'll see if there's a whole lot more after this. Probably not, but yeah. So Haley's gone, and the Steelers, just become known. To my point about if you're a fan of another team, wanting them to just see them get their comeuppance, they just kind of become known as this messed up reality show. There's a YouTube channel that I like called Urinating Tree,
Yeah,
and that guy's a Pittsburgh fan. He starts making these Days of Our Steelers videos.
yeah, I've seen, yeah.
Yeah, which is very just hilarious and easy to make in that era, where he just details the soap opera garbage going on. That all that drama. The worst thing about that drama is it all carries into the next season and continues to just weigh them down. They try to franchise tag Bell again. This time he sits out for the entire season.
He just should have taken. He would have. I don't know how. I just wonder how much guaranteed money was in that contract the Steelers were offering him.
Well,
I wonder if he would have made more money if he just would have signed that contract, even if they would.
he would have.
I'm not that in the know.
He came out recently. We're recording this in kind of the summer of 2021. He came out recently, and as of this recording, nobody's signed him yet. And he came out and was bashing the Jets and Adam Gase, and they didn't use him well. Which, I mean, the Jets and Adam Gase deserve to be bashed. Terrible coach, but it's like that's where he just made some bad decisions for his career. Certainly, if he would have signed the $70 million deal, not only Steve would have made more money immediately, probably, but he definitely would have had a more successful career going forward, I think, as opposed to being a free agent running back that nobody wants right now.
It was so predictable that he was never gonna he's not the type either to stay in the gym, work out, stay in shape, stay focused. You could tell he's just gonna be off, not taking, if you let yourself go that whole year. I didn't have a problem with him even sitting out that year if he didn't think it was, money he wanted. And it's just, I don't know. I don't know who his agent was, but he wasn't very good because he did Le'Veon Bell no favors there.
Agree.
So
Bell sits out that whole next season, 2018. Ben gets into hot water. He kind of publicly calls out some of his teammates. That's a whole mess. That team the next year starts 7-2-1. They collapse at the end of the season and shockingly end up missing the playoffs. And then to top all that off, Antonio Brown completely loses his mind and decides to inexplicably sabotage his Hall of Fame career, forces his way out of Pittsburgh, then forces his way out of Oakland and New England as well. So that was all then. I would say now, several years later, the Steelers are for sure not as stacked with talent as that 2017 team. And they do still have a little bit of drama. Steve, you kind of mentioned Juju dancing on the logos and stuff.
Yeah, I guess he did that before a game, before that Buffalo game. Yeah,
it's immature. I think it's immature. I don't know that it rises to the level of some of the stuff from this 17.
Yeah,
season.
I never felt like he's selfish or taunting per se,
Yeah.
I don't know. He never seems to raise to that level.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say the Steelers now not as talented but healthier.
It's so much easier to root for when they got rid of those 2 or 3 people. Yeah, it's just so much easier to root for.
Yes, so much more likable as a team now, a team that you want to root for. And looking back on that 2017 season, it was just a missed opportunity because that season should have been the culmination of this brilliant rebuild. And, that team put together a really good record. Steve, here's a fun fact. Only the 2004 team and the 1978 team won more games than the 2017 team. Do you know that? In Steelers history?
I did. I know I've seen where they compared the triplets Ben, Bell, and Brown to the Dallas Cowboys and other all the the Dallas and San Francisco, their numbers are comparable, and all those teams were, or even Buffalo, they were all in the Super Bowl, and this team never even they made it to one championship game.
Right.
And I knew they were in trouble too because look at Bell in that championship game. Oh my, I don't know. I wasn't in his body. Maybe he was hurt. Maybe he wasn't. But he didn't even try. He just was nope, not even gonna play. And
in sports, I think you have talent, and then you have in that talent, you have people that are winners and people that just aren't winners. And the Steelers had a lot of guys that just weren't winners, and so they really blow a good opportunity because they had a great team. Again, third best record in franchise history, and they bow out in the first round of the playoffs in an embarrassing fashion against the Jaguars. So yeah, just kind of a sad era there in Steeler history. That team had the capability to do so much more to possibly deliver a 7th championship, and they just couldn't do it.
And it would have kept the Patriots from winning a Super Bowl too.
That would have been a bonus.
Yeah, I just, it's frustrating, and it just like, and there were just like a lot of little things, like always at the end of the half, instead of throwing a Hail Mary, you have to throw that stupid check down to Brown so he can get like his garbage yards. Like they did stuff like I just remember stuff like just annoying me like that, because it was just indicative of what was important to these players. Getting my numbers and getting a big payday is more important than winning like a championship or a Super Bowl, which I don't think they realize. Like if you do that, you'll get a big payday, and the Steelers will take care of you, especially if you're like a Super Bowl champion. They definitely take care of those guys, at least in my opinion. I mean, I've never had to work for them, so maybe they don't. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely misplaced priorities, and again, just blown potential.
Yeah, it's a shame, but I mean, I can't say that it wasn't predictable.
Agree.
Yeah,
agree.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Well, that wraps it up for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. You can check us out on the web or Facebook or Twitter. All of those links are in the show description. We ask also like to ask if you'd like to leave a review of the show. Please do that. That certainly helps people find us if you like what you hear. And other than that, we'll catch you next time.
All right, Yins don't be no Jagoffs.
See ya.